Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time you're listening. You are tuning into the Preserving History and Democracy show from the Doña Ana County Clerk's Office. My name is Amanda López Askin. I am currently very proud to serve as the Doña Ana County Clerk. Today, we have an exciting show. I think they're all exciting because whether we're talking about history or democracy, it's what we really believe in. But today we have a special guest, and that would be Secretary Toulouse Oliver, Madam Secretary, our Secretary of State, who has been a great support for our office and offices across the state. And we are focusing on Women's History Month. So, having said that, long intro, I am thrilled, excited, jazzed, plug in all of those adjectives to have our Secretary of State for New Mexico, which is kind of a big deal, Maggie Toulouse Oliver. So welcome to Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks to your team for having me.
Yes, the team, right? So let's talk about that for just a second. One of the reasons we asked you to be on, and you could be on every podcast if we had our way, but specifically this one is to talk about Women's History Month, right? So there's an entire month set aside to talk about women in history and really to punctuate the idea that maybe there hasn't been enough of that done in the history of our country, right? We haven't talked enough about how women have contributed to the successes, ideas, and all of the great things that happen in our community every single day. So, hence, we have an entire month to ourselves. In some ways.
I wish we had an entire month to ourselves.
Well, an entire month, yeah, it's not like a vacation by any means, but it's a month that focuses on the impact of women, right? And so we could just say it simply like that. And so when I said my team, that kind of leads me to kind of the first thing I want to talk about, which is from your perspective, how do you think women lead differently than men?
Well, I think for one thing, we lead from our personal experience. And I think that that's very valuable because at the end of the day, there are just issues, challenges, life experiences, perspectives that women have. And this is, not a slight on men, but that just men don't have, right? They don't experience. And so, like, an example that I love to use is, I heard a story once of this very bipartisan coalition in Congress that happened when they were trying to pass Title IX to create equity in women's sports. And, former athletes from both the right and the left who were in Congress, women came together based on that experience of having been women in sports in high school and college and not having that equity to pass that bill. And they were talking about, this is what I went through when I tried to play basketball or soccer or run track or whatever when I was in high school and college. And so I think that that's really meaningful. But I also think women, at least I'll speak for myself and you from what I know, Amanda, of your leadership model. I work very collaboratively. I have a collaborative leadership style. Yes, at the end of the day, I make the final decision. The buck stops with me, but I really bring my team in to help me make these decisions because I want to make sure that there's buy-in. I want to make sure that whatever decision we make that we move forward with, that we have gone through everything, we've asked the questions, we've addressed the concerns, and even if we make a decision that some folks don't like, at least that has been discussed. And I'm not saying that men don't also have collaborative leadership style, but I think women, from what I understand and from the conversations I've had, more women have that kind of collaborative leadership style.
I will say the data, I'm big on data, which is always surprising to some people. I love to tell stories. I'm a storyteller naturally. I kind of always have like a lead up and then I have like but what I will say is I also am very data driven. And so that's why when I first started as clerk, I was appointed in 2018. I remember doing the research and kind of plugging in because as a new clerk, you don't know what you don't know. And you learn very quickly that the expectation is for you to know it all. And we know that we never get there, unfortunately. A, because election law is changing all the time, but B, who can, right? Let's be realistic. But what I found connected to elections in New Mexico, and I'll always circle back to that because like I've fallen in love with elections, is we talked about the MIT study initially. And I remember you and I talking about the MIT, basically a think tank, right? It's a gatherer of all the data, the best and brightest in our country. And I remember saying like, why don't we talk about this more? This is data. This is not something that has a lean either way. It is literally something that we could utilize to promote how good a job that New Mexico does in elections. And it was something that has thankfully, I mean, we've started to talk about it more and use it as a basically encouraging New Mexicans to say, hey, you know what? We're on some lists that we're on the bottom of some lists that we're working constantly to improve on. But elections is not one of them because we do that so well. So I will say, like, the data tells me also that women have shown to be more collaborative leaders. Now, that's not to say, I also say, like, think about how we were socialized, Maggie, and you think about, you and I are similar age, I think maybe a year apart. You think I was born, in the early 70s, mid 70s. And I think about how we were socialized in the 70s and 80s. There still was a bent of that traditional role of women. And I think about kind of the Gen Z that we're talking about, and even who's behind Gen Z, which I don't know what that is yet, but they're going to be socialized just a lot differently than we are. Like, we grew up thinking certain ways about men and women and the roles, and that was kind of disrupted probably in the 90s, maybe into the 2000s. Of course, this is my perspective, and this is where I'm speaking from. And so we don't. I always kind of would lean into some of those traditional roles, right? And I find that I still do that sometimes. And I'll use this as an example. When we're in a room and there's a computer issue, there's something kind of very complex that needs to be figured out. There's a joke that I'll say, like, "Is there a man in the room?" Right? And it's but I'm kind of not kidding, right? When it comes to those kind of things. So I do think there is a definite idea that women lead differently and we're more collaborative, basically because we probably didn't have a lot of choice in that. That's just kind of how we were socialized. You get along, right? We, harmony is like a big thing. When for me growing up, it's like kind of just. So I think that will play into it also. But I also lean into really getting ideas of what, and I encourage, all ideas. There's never a bad idea. There's never a bad question. Ultimately, the buck stops here, and I have to make a decision, and I do. And what's my saying? I'm not pizza. I can't make everybody happy. And so when I say that, the shorthand for that is I'm not pizza. Like, literally, I can't make everybody happy. But I think I want to. I would love that. That'd be a great world if everybody was happy. But the reality is that I can't. How have you reached the point to where you are settled into being okay with being disliked just for either your role, and that's exacerbated by the fact that maybe that you're a woman?
Gosh, that's such that's such a meaningful question because you and I, in addition to being professional colleagues, are personal friends, and so I know we've talked a lot about this, but to share with everybody else, I started running elections when I was 30 years old.
In the largest county with the largest voter roll in our state, yes.
And I was ultimately up to the job, but I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And one of the things, at that point in my life is to your point, that I thought there was totally a way to, you know, please all sides all the time, and it was just through competence, right? If we approach something competently, then nobody can complain. Well, obviously that's not true. It's not true in life, it's not true in public service, and it's definitely not true, as a woman in public service. And I have definitely experienced times where I am held to a much higher standard than my male counterparts. I won't name names, but I will just say generally, there is a newspaper of record in the state, and we're also human beings. So if we make a mistake, as we're doing our jobs, and mind you, I'm in my 19th year of public service now, so of course, I've made mistakes over the years, but my job has always been, or my goal has always been, come forward, admit the mistake, fix it, put something in place to ensure it never happens again. because that's what we can do as public officials. And there's a newspaper of record that, we made a mistake one time, and they said, well, we expect more from her. And it's like, what do I do with that? Because I appreciate, on the one hand, that I'm being given a lot of credit for being good at my job and competent. But on the other hand, if I look at similar examples of my male counterparts, they're not held to that standard. So that's really challenging. And to your point about socialization, and making decisions and making the hard decisions, this is what I've learned over the years, is that I can be, I will never be perfect at my job. No one will ever be perfect at their job. Even if you think about the greatest presidents in history, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and FDR, they made mistakes and they were excoriated for them. But I think it's harder for us as women, people pleasing, wanting to be liked. I have just learned that I have to just be able to sleep at night with the decisions I make. And that is my North Star at this point.
I will say that is honestly kind of where I have landed. In 2018, it was a very volatile time in this office for various reasons, and we've gotten over the hump. And I knew one of the first things that I needed to do was make sure that our team here was taken care of and to build that team. And here we are, almost nearing 7 years in September, if you can believe that. 7 years, right? That we have worked on that. We have been successful, and part of it has been this very much idea that I can't do this alone. Like, I need you. I need your help, whether that's HR, whether that's administration, whether it's the staff, whether it's election officials. Like, I need you. I literally can't do this. I have to be successful and to do what I need to do to serve our community. I need a lot of help and support. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. Like, I do, and I have gotten it. I mean, I've been fortunate to have received it, and we've been able to do, I think, a tremendous job. One of the things that I think, when we talk about women in, and this is kind of it's not touchy necessarily, but it's something that I don't think you and I have talked about either professionally or personally. But the photos that are often used of women in media, and I can use myself as an example. I'm sure you probably at over 19, almost 20 years in public service, half the time, and then you don't want to talk about it because it's like, are you being vain? I'm really not. I just don't want to necessarily be with my mouth hanging open, my neck at an angle, and a picture that's like 4 years old. And it's not a huge deal, but it's something that when I look at a lot of different publications, not just local or even statewide, but nationally, there tends to be anger or like this unflattering kind of, and maybe that's my perspective, but maybe you can offer some, and then the criticism on our appearance, which don't even, let's I mean, where do we even go from there, right?
That's the piece. So yeah, I mean, there are plenty of photos out there of me, mouth wide open, because I'm always, doing this, yapping. But I'll tell you that the one that really shook me was, and I can't remember, it was for a national publication. I can't remember if it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, but they came out when I was county clerk in Bernalillo County, and they took a photo of me on, like, there's this breezeway that went between our building and a building across the street. And I got a full page letter from a woman who I did not know, breaking down all the ways in which my appearance was not up to snuff. The pants that I was wearing, that I keep my hair long, that that I don't dress professionally. And it's funny, I was hoping we were going to talk about this, because I think one of the biggest challenges I had, especially when I was a young elected official, I was 30, and I've always been kind of baby faced, so I've always looked, and I'm not complaining about this, I've always looked younger than I am, but I wanted to be taken seriously, in my job. And that's something I had to worry about as a woman, that I don't know if it had been a man. And so I was making sure I was dressing, honestly, I dressed kind of dowdy. bought all these professional dresses and suits, and I kind of almost felt like I was playing dress up in a way, if that makes sense. But anyway, um, this woman wrote down this whole page, and at the end, it was sort of like, I'm telling you this because I want you to be successful. I'm telling you this because I feel like you can go places, but you need to fix these things or you're not going to be successful. And I just thought, are you kidding me? And it was honestly in that moment when I decided I'm just going to be who I am. I'm going to quit trying, to fit myself into a box that someone wants to see me in. And if people don't like it, um, they don't have to vote for me. And of course, I want them to. And I'm not going out there deliberately trying to make people mad or turn them off. I feel like I dress professionally and I know what I'm doing now. But, that really upset me. And especially that it came from another woman
Yeah.
being so critical.
I think there's a part where I think it's okay to say, and I consider myself a public servant. I have been a public servant really since about 2005. And even prior to that, I worked in child welfare and was a foster parent and did some other stuff. And so that in its own way obviously was service to my community. But I think there's something to be said for listening to our constituents, listening to the public, listening to those that are invested, even if they didn't vote for us, which is fine, listening to them and pulling out the things that are valid and criticisms that, okay, maybe there's room for improvement in that. Like, I hear what you're saying. All right, let's look at that. And we have changed things and processes in our department specifically because we get feedback and I'm like, you know what, that makes sense. And you'll know this. Sometimes there's these ideas like, why do we do it that way? Well, because we've always done it that way. But is it embedded in law? Because everything we do is statute driven, right? And so I'm like, well, show me the law. Because I'm a little bit, because this doesn't seem like the best way to do it. And so sure enough, oh, there's no law that says we have to do it this way. I was like, well, let's figure out this process, right? And so I noticed that that is something that that rigidity is something that I bring. I think I'm not rigid. I'm flexible. If it makes sense, I like to say yes. I want to make stat right. So one of the things that we did specifically, and this is, we were able to obtain funding for a brand new build of our elections warehouse. And the lift on that was tremendous. But what I really believe is that, the legislators in our community got behind elections and they got behind our office and they got behind our team in a huge way. And I'm grateful for them every day. But I also think the skills that I have learned, and I'm not going to say, how do you separate being like a former therapist from a woman? But those are the skills. Being the personality that I am led me to kind of go into the field of therapy and the helping field, so to speak, which on the other end has helped when I have conversations with people because I feel like I can navigate that space a little bit better. Do you find that when you are, when you're creating policy, when you are doing all the work at the legislature, when you're bartering and having these kind of discussions about what's up next for elections, what's changing, do you find your communication style is different when you're talking to a woman versus a man? And again, let's be clear, this isn't about us against them, right? I am. Men are great, but we're talking about Women's History Month, and so I kind of want to focus on where women are in terms of policy making and how that happens. So, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, no, and that's such a good point. I mean, we need everyone. I mean, we're lucky here in New Mexico in that we have a majority female legislature. That for the first time, and we're one of the few states that does. We've hit parity and we've gone beyond that, which is fantastic. But I think I do. I think that it's, like that example I was giving about the Title IX in Congress. I think again, there's just these similar experiences we've had. And I'm able to relate to female legislators or female administrators on a different level. I'm going to still talk about the same things, right? But, I also think a lot of what we do, to your point about being a therapist, Amanda, it requires emotional intelligence. And again, I'm not saying men don't have it, But to your earlier point about sort of being socialized into being
The
so
caretakers, the
aware,
warm
yeah, what's going
personalities,
on in
right?
our family unit, what's going on in our social unit, and trying to be peacekeepers and trying to honestly make sure that things move forward, right? Make sure that the family kind of stays together, and everyone's got what they need and all of that stuff. There's I would say I talk to each individual legislator differently, depending on my relationship with them. But I definitely think that with women legislators, I'm definitely going to rely on what I know we share in terms of personal experience. Again, it's not men's fault, but they just haven't had those same experiences that we have.
Right. And so we can talk about, I mean, men could talk about the pressures maybe that they felt at very young being providers, right? They're socialized just differently. And so that in itself is its own stressor. So again, there's no minimization of the roles that we play, but I think an acknowledgement of kind of what our challenges are okay. And we can talk about that. And it may be helpful to everyone that's listening specifically, and men as well, right? They can to understand the criticisms of appearance have I get that quite a bit, and I luckily to do this job, I take very little personally.
Oh, absolutely.
I have how could I come to work on a daily basis? How could I advocate for, do the things, dig into what I really believe in? And then every time there's a criticism of me, cave. I just couldn't do that. So I had to make an active decision to kind of stand in where I was and be able to sleep at night and accept the fact that people would not be happy with me. But the criticisms of my appearance or the picking apart, and sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes there's very much an inappropriateness, right? That could
Oh,
even
yeah.
come from that, right? And I've also been told, and this always makes me laugh, is and this has been twice, once from a man, once from a woman, but an involuntary, you don't look like you have a PhD. And to which I
Oh, yeah.
to which I kind of laugh, and I'm like, well, I don't know if there's an actually, like, what does that look like? What is it, like this nerdy look, or what is it? Because I could do that. But I think that is also kind of something that there's a focus on the appearance that I think men just don't have.
I was going to tell you, I haven't Googled myself in a long time because, everyone knows that Googling yourself is just not a good thing to do anyway. It's kind of like reading the comments.
Right. It's not. What did they say? It's not your business what anybody else thinks of you, kind of a thing. Right.
Exactly, right,
Right.
exactly. But I Googled myself, the most recent time a few years ago, and the two top how the top
Yeah.
searches were Maggie Toulouse Oliver age and Maggie Toulouse Oliver husband. Not what I've done in my career,
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
you know,
And I think that circles back to that idea of that socialization. Of course, we grew up in the 80s. It felt like a purer time then. And of course, that was before socials. That was before the 24-hour news cycle. That was before getting caught up in so much of, what I guess the drama of basically, I remember literally my mom saying, leave the house at 8 a.m. in the morning in the summer and I'll see you at 5, and just figuring it out during the day, right? Can I come back home for some water? That was
drink
like
from
always
the hose, man. We had
drink
to
from the
drink from the
hose. I'm
hose.
telling you, the hose had really good water. I don't know why and how.
It did.
But for sure, that was something that I feel very nostalgic for. But I cannot always help but think of how, Dad got the big piece of chicken, and it was very much, which again, I'm grateful for the childhood I have. I'm not complaining, but also to offer that as a guidance for why we are the way we are, I think is really important. Who we saw in media growing up, who we saw leading growing up, there weren't women. So when I served on the Board of Regents, I'll never forget serving and photos that of the Board of Regents are predominantly displayed in one of the main buildings, and walking and seeing my photo there. But then bigger than that, seeing other girls that look like me, nice little local girls like me, being able to see that and think, I am so fortunate to be able to lead a whatever X amount of million organization and help support it in the ways that I can. And you can too, kind of a perspective. And you can too. That leads me to the next question is like, if you were talking to a group of young people, which know you do frequently. I know you're a very popular speaker, but specifically women, specifically young girls heading into womanhood or being older, I guess. What would you say to them that you hope that they would take in and apply, that they would really try to work on, or they would really because I know I think about, and I'll just put out, I'll answer the question first and then I'll give you free reign, but I always think about Brene Brown, who I adore, right?
Yeah.
And anybody who doesn't know who Brene Brown is, she's very much into pop culture right now. But I will tell you, she is a very serious academic from Houston. So I know that she has the books and she has all the fun things, but her data goes deep and it goes hard. And it is over the course of the last 20 years. It's not just something that popped up on a podcast. It's really good stuff. And I used some of her stuff in my dissertation, right? So I can say that literally I really believe. But there's and I'm going to paraphrase, and it's kind of like the man in the arena idea, but it's also like you stand in your story or you're going to hustle for your self-worth all the time. And that's something that I think about quite often. Like, I'm okay with the mistakes I've made, and I will make mistakes in the future. And as long as I've done everything I can to make that right or to fix it so it doesn't happen, then I don't have to hustle. Basically, I don't have to scramble to feel worthy of what, because I've sat in it and I'm okay with it. And so that idea of being truthful with yourself and trying to lead with integrity, and if you have that default, then you're going to be all right, because that will enable you to sleep at night, right? Those are the things. That's one of the things. I have a list, but that's one.
Yeah, no, I think knowing and understanding yourself and who you are, and that you don't have to be exactly like anybody else to lead and to make things happen. I do think there's a lot of pressure, particularly on young women, to conform, and to, I guess probably everybody. Uh, Let me pause right there and just say it's funny. I think we've been doing a lot of like, well, men too. And, I think, again, that's part of our conditioning, Amanda, right? I'm not
I
here.
don't want to offend. I don't want to leave them out.
I'm gonna just give a blanket statement here that nothing here we are saying is intended to offend men. And if it does, oh, oh well.
Sorry. Yeah.
So really, standing strong in yourself, knowing that you can be different and that everybody can lead a little differently. Everybody doesn't have to look alike. Everybody doesn't have to talk alike. Everybody can bring their own skills and their own perspective to a situation. And I think too, importantly, going back to what I was saying earlier, don't let them hold you to a higher standard because you're a woman. I mean, that's the whole problem. The criticism that we are seeing out there in the world right now with so-called DEI, diversity, equity, and equality. The whole point of that is or in inclusion, I'm sorry, is to ensure that the people who have over time and in a structural way in this country not had access to the same opportunities that, quite frankly, white males have had. That is the whole point, is to say we not that you get an advantage, but that the place we start from is essentially the same. Because historically, it's been here for women, for people of color. So what we're saying is, let's just bring the starting point even, and then we can go from there, right? And I think that I think that the problem for women is that we're always held to a higher standard and a different standard. And that should not be the case. So I would say hold your ground when you're being told, oh, well, we expect more of you than your male counterparts. Say that's not okay. That's not okay. You either hold us to the same standard or you don't.
Right. And it kind of negates what their point is at that point,
Yes, exactly.
because
Exactly
they've
right.
lost me if they're already there. And this kind of maybe will come full circle, kind of in this whole discussion. Um, I have been fortunate in my life to be surrounded by amazing women. And I say that with, of course, my mother and family members, but I've also had what I call just basically my chosen family of women in my life that have, and that's one area where I actually feel badly for men because they're not socialized necessarily to connect, communicate, seek solace from, seek support, verbally work out what's going on with us, with you, in a way that we are, right? And so it's not a coincidence that we have these kind of disconnects connected to communication sometimes, when it comes to, like, they say women are from Mars, men are from Venus. Again, this goes back to the socialization. It's unfortunate that men are don't seem to have the same supports that women do connected to friendship, right? And if you are a man and you do, then good for you. That means
Yes,
you probably are a
absolutely.
great communicator. That means you have probably have been connected to women in your life who've encouraged that, and you found that it was helpful and useful, and so you're like, I'm going to do this, and I love that, right? But how have women in your life, in terms of your friendship, because you and I, you alluded to it earlier, you and I are good friends, and I know when there are things that come up, not just with elections, work, some of the responsibilities, and I've called you and said, okay, can you put on your Secretary of State hat, or can you put on your former county clerk hat, because there's things that come up very specifically that I want your perspective on, and it may help add information, and I mean help me make a decision about something that maybe I'm on the fence about. But we also, there's other things where that hurt my feelings and I need to work through this. Can we talk about this? Because I'm a human and that happens quite often. Can we talk about the role of women as supports in your life, and how that has helped you, not just personally, but also professionally?
My female friendships lift me up, hold me up, keep me going. I don't know what I would do without it. And I think it's a special blessing to have women friends who are also elected officials who have had the same experiences, or at least similar experiences. And we can all, because again, being an elected official is a special kind of putting yourself out there for criticism and praise too. But I will tell you, for anybody who's listening who thinks that people go into being an elected official for like ego building, if that's what they're doing, they're going into the wrong business. Because
You have to have a
being a
sense of
public
self,
servant,
right?
you absolutely do. And if you don't, it's going to be really hard for you, because again, you're public property at that point, right? What every decision you make, everything you do in the public sphere, even things you do in the private sphere, right, are being judged and critiqued and criticized, occasionally praised. And I'll tell you, anytime I get a thank you or a note of praise, it means the world to me. If not for my friendships with women, and again, I want to call out especially elected official women, I don't think I could do this, because it can be a very
Lonely.
it's an experience where you feel very alone. And you have to build those networks and those friendships around you.
Well, it's funny. I'm always jealous of, like, the city councils or like groups in which they're the same position, within a group, and they collectively make decisions. So a lot of the criticism, a lot of the things, they can work out together. And there's something about being in a sole position like I have, right? I have Doña County, and I have to own the decisions of our office. I have to own the consequences of them. It doesn't. I always say, like, to be responsible for everything but not in control of everything is a torturous way for a type A personality to sit in, because you're constantly like, and you just have, that's where you have to, like, build your team. You have to support all the things. And so I would agree with you, like, that role for women in my life has been invaluable. And I literally would not have run in 2020. had I not had a group of supportive women in my life who said, not only can you do this, but you can do this well. And so I've been pretty grateful, and that includes you. So thank you very much for
Aw.
that.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that I haven't asked that you think is like pressing and that I absolutely need to? I definitely appreciate your time and all the effort that you and all the support in all the ways that you've given over the last almost 7 years.
Well, it's been just an absolute pleasure to work with you, Amanda, and it's been an absolute gift to become friends with you. The last thing I would say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that one of the most effective ways women can build power in this country is by voting. Making sure you're registered, making sure the women in your life are registered, making sure they're getting out and voting. And I would say, even especially in the quote unquote small races, I mean, we're all very focused as a nation at the top, at the very top. But more than likely, the decisions that get made at the very most local level are what are impacting us in our daily lives. And so, as you know, Amanda, we have what we call a regular local election coming up this November. And it's going to be city councils and mayors and school boards and tax questions, special districts. And, for most of us, that's where, the rubber really meets the road, especially around the rights of women, around our daily lives, our families, the things that impact us the most. So I just would leave by saying, make sure you get registered to vote at nmvote.org, and make sure that you are getting the people in your life out to vote, and they know there's an election coming up in November, and I'm sure you can add more to that.
Well, I always say that was, and you're alluding to in 2019, they consolidated elections and municipalities had the option. When we say municipalities, we basically mean like the entities or the cities or the little towns within your county had the option to opt in and basically have the county run their elections fully. We're fortunate in Doñana because all 5 of our municipalities opted in. So that was from 2019 forward. And so what we say now is every November, like clockwork, there is an election. It's not some random one like in February or March where you're like, should I be voting in that election? Because it says vote here. It's great because it's every November like clockwork. And so just to kind of definitely always discuss that, because that was the point, right? Is we want to increase participation, and it's been creeping up, which we love. But what I will also say is, circling back to what you said initially, is the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico are awesome, and they put out a voter guide, and they do a lot of great support things. But
Can I interrupt you? They
yes,
also recently gave you an award,
yes, they were awesome. Yes, they
which is
did.
well
It was
deserved.
I'm a democracy champion, which I am. And this is where we also do this, right?
Yes.
Oh, and this is a challenge, I think, for women specifically, and when you're running for office. And then also culturally, for us in New Mexico, for various reasons, including some of our faith, we can't toot our own horn too much. We can't talk about what we've done. We can't say I. But we have to also show that we're competent and strong and that we're going to own it and we did it, right? So it's like this balance that I think we have to have as an elected official. And maybe men feel that too. I mean, I don't know. I can only speak for myself. And I know we've talked about this previously. But the year of the anniversary of the right to vote, they were punctuating it. They used if every woman voted. If every woman voted. And so when you talk about the things that we can do, and go to nmvote.org, talk to young people, tell them why it's important, tell them about the local races, tell them what you believe in. They have absolute access to so much information. If they're passionate about a certain thing, they can literally get in their Google machine and they can find the candidate that supports them. There's so many things, right, that so much information that they have access to that we didn't have. We literally used encyclopedias, Maggie, which is like bizarre to me now. But
I
we had
know.
to look things up.
We had them in our house.
I know we did, and I used those suckers too. So I think about that a lot in terms of that access to information, but also this idea: if every woman voted.
Yes.
I mean, that is like, you know, the emoji has the mind blown. I think that would be something else. Now, let's go ahead and take a step back and say if every eligible person voted.
Everybody voted.
And we're all in for that, to be clear. But we're talking about women today. And so if every woman voted, I think the climate in a lot of places would be different. And, you know, maybe it hopefully be for the better. I mean,
I agree.
I agree.
I just can't imagine a world in which almost full participation would be worse. You know, the diversity of opinions, the diversity of representation. I think it would just be amazing. And I think that's always been my goal. I know that's your goal as an election official. And I think we just keep working toward it.
We do. And in Doña Ana County, we have been creeping up in terms of our participation. Not fast enough. It's never fast enough, right? As a type A, kind of like impatient person, like, come on now, yesterday. But it's getting there, and we know that it will take time. And I do think the regular local election being every November like clockwork is going to help. But I also think access to information, combating misinformation, malinformation, all those things. Like there's all the things that we can and will do in New Mexico to secure the right to vote. And I know that I am deeply appreciative of your efforts. And I know this very well. The personal cost is immense. And so you really have to believe in what you do, because I will tell you the cost of it can be on a daily basis so taxing that you may want to throw in the towel. But when you turn around and you see a young person excited about participating in democracy for the first time, or they go to a voting location and we got the bells and it's those first time voters, that's everything good in the world, right? Yeah.
No, that's what makes it all worth it.
Yeah. Thank you for being our guest today. We will definitely have you back on to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. Share it far and wide when you listen to this, and it'll be a fun conversation to listen to, I hope. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Amanda.
All right,
Big
appreciate
love.
you. Thank you for listening to our show today. We hope it was as informative and as fun as I thought it was. It is called Preserving History and Democracy, and you can find, if you put in that in your search engine, you can find us on all of the social media platforms. We also have an amazing podcast that is super fun and talks about the history of Doña Ana County and beyond. And so make sure that you subscribe. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.